Para terminar esta mañana de presentaciones vamos a invitarlo a Andrés Roldán, a que suba, nuestro amigo Andrés, que dirige el Parque Explora, Museo Interactivo Planetario Acuario de la ciudad de Medellín, que tiene por misión inspirar, comunicar y transformar mediante escenarios de interacción para la apropiación pública del conocimiento científico, tecnológico y social. Y Andrés, además, es diseñador industrial. ¿Sí, Andrés? ¿Eso dice? Gracias.
Bueno, buenas. Aló, ahí sí me oyen. Bueno, ¿dónde está el...? A ver, aquí. Bueno, Medellín es una ciudad que todos han oído hablar de ella, no necesariamente en el mejor sentido de la palabra, con una historia bien conocida, una reputación, pues diría que ganada pues por una historia pues difícil de un país con unas complejidades enormes y con una cultura que al mismo tiempo que ha sabido ser, ha sufrido grandes dramas frente a, pues si no me voy a detener en esto, pues a un legado de violencias de toda naturaleza, de conflictos sociales que han afectado la memoria del país. También ha sido como un sinónimo en el siglo XX y XXI de transformación, de innovación. Fue como la segunda ciudad emergente del país que tiene una gran tradición en el desarrollo industrial, tecnológico, y por consiguiente pues ese gran impulso de desarrollo también ha servido para sobreponer esos años de incertidumbre y dificultad que han marcado a la ciudad como un símbolo, ¿no?, de las mejores cosas. Entonces, pues antes de entrarnos a hablar de Explora, pues es importante como explicar como algunos elementos que conforman hoy el espacio público o que ha sido la historia del desarrollo de la ciudad, y que finalmente cómo se desarrolló la ciudad fue también un factor de las violencias que emergieron en el tiempo. Las violencias no son solo decisiones de grupos ciudadanos, son las maneras en cómo nos organizamos como sociedad, cómo disponemos el orden de las ciudades, y al habitarlas pues establecemos de entrada unas relaciones sociales que en algunos casos son difíciles, son tensas, son complicadas. Entonces, esta imagen pues deja ver, bueno, no lo muestra del todo, pero lo que se ve allá al fondo, Medellín es un valle rodeado de montañas. Es una ciudad que tiene un crecimiento enorme poblacional, y creo que va a un ritmo tan acelerado, mucho más acelerado de lo que la ciudad es capaz de decidir de cómo debe hacerse la ciudad. De alguna forma esa presión, ese crecimiento demográfico hace que haya una organización desordenada, caótica, probablemente muy parecida a la que vemos aquí en las villas en Argentina, o en las favelas en Brasil.
It has to do with the urban growth that it started with, we can actually date it to the origin of European cities, and we started building them, they started building with a very ordered way of organizing the cities. I can think of a very romantic way of thinking of the neighborhoods, the villages, the favelas, as the way that they organize it at the very beginning. It's a round or in a labyrinthic way of a small street kind of neighborhoods. A month ago, Florencia, Americo, and some other friends from the American Alliance and the Smithsonian came to Medellin, and we actually wandered around the city to see how the city is made of small streets and how all this brings life to the city. So let's think of a city that has growth enormously in this way, in an organic neighborhood oriented of self-building process. And it's not precisely a space where the public space is thought as an important part of it. So public space and the open space, the space to share, starts to disappear with time. It starts to erase itself. And then certain social needs like, for example, going out and demonstrate on Plaza de Mayo or play soccer if you don't have actually a public space to do it, you actually start closing streets, and then this space is more limited, more confined, where the territory starts to be defined through social needs. When I think of my own childhood, I think of space. And I think of the city that is illustrated in my mind. It's a city where I moved from my house to school, and then in my own neighborhood, I would move around about 5 or 6 blocks. And beyond that space, maybe you would find, the unknown, the uncertain, hell in a way. So we are thinking now of very dense, very populated areas where all these tensions now arise, and the territory is divided. The borders are limited to social relations that are taking place, and violence throughout our decades actually take place. So this very suffered and tough history of Medellin is a story of inequality, and so we're organized around an unplanned, unorganized space without a profound sense of public space, and that's where the violence in Medellin was born. Drug trafficking, drug dealing, all these phenomena, Pablo Escobar, and all these stories that are so part of the neighborhood, the territory, the streets of Medellin. So these years are over, the 90s, the wars against the cartels, and then we inherit these difficult stories that, turn into questions for us citizens. And we wonder, are we these people from Colombia? Are we these people in Medellin? Is this the stereotype that we have around the world? Do we actually portray this image of us, selling drugs? Are we all, using drugs all day long? Is that what people perceive of us? We are tired. We're sick and tired of people having these stereotypes of us. And we as a society need to make a change so that the world can understand us in a different way, but also to change the behaviors that led the world to believe that we were like that. So as from the year 2000, we start to see the consequences of the reflections of how to think in a different way, our reality in a more equal way. So this image, it's a image that portrays this part of our history. This is Carabobo Avenue, which is one of the main central avenues of the city. This is the second biggest university and most important university, state university in the country. At the back, you see middle-class industrial neighborhoods, popular neighborhoods, and then the botanic garden of the city, which dates from last century, actually. And this is an amusement park. It's a small amusement park. And on this side, you can see the Moravia neighborhood, which used to be the garbage disposal area of the city of Medellin. And this is where the metro of the city goes by. This is a bit of the history of our city. It's a city that tries to organize itself from an urban point of view, which is growing organically. And you can see that it's surrounded by neighborhoods that in a way establish strong divisions on the kind of city that it turned into. So from the year 2000, there's a certain number of initiatives that wonder, can a public space with a perspective of an education and social change point of view can actually create a new public space and the concept of a public space. So a few institutions are born, as the Museum of Science Explora, and this is the institution I direct, as one of the elements that can actually mark this this change. These are some images of what we do. It's an interactive center for the awareness of public knowledge through experience, phenomena, real effects, where visitors have some kind of connection with science, with earth and space, biology. There's a big aquarium, a planetarium, and the universe and beyond. So this is what the Science Museum is about, the interaction, the connection with this phenomena. That's at the heart of the museum. But I'm not going to talk about what we do at the museum. I'd like to share with you about this idea of this museum that pretends or tries to have an educational point of view can actually be transpired to the city as a whole. So we've got the university, the amusement park, Moravia, which used to be the garbage disposal area, the middle-class industrial neighborhoods, the cemetery, and the metro line. So what did we do? We had to do some kind of acupuncture of the city. We need to make an intervention that enabled us to create a powerful content in a vulnerable community that needs to be articulated through public transit in order to have a new conversation with the territories. This is the formula for transformation. This formula for transformation can be actually exemplified in this small spot over here, which used to be the garbage disposal area. And when it was closed, what happened on top of that, with the thousands of people coming to Medellin, away from the war, coming from the field to the city, was actually the site that they believed was right to actually build their own houses. And that was on top of these piles of garbage that became very populated throughout time, and the city was actually not paying attention to what was happening right there. So the first concept is social urbanism. Can we create a kind of urbanism that would establish a new conversation? In a certain way, the growth of the cities these days is still characterized by the builders who are determining really the way we are organizing ourselves, the public spaces and meeting spaces. So the acupuncture of the social transformation was a mixture of the public transit, the cultural interventions at the heart of marginal neighborhoods to create new spaces that would give a new sense to the area, and that it would imply making use a different use of these meeting places and open spaces. This is an image of a park library in the San Javier neighborhood, and this is a metro cable where you have public transit that goes on top. It's an air means of transit, and this is where you find the libraries at the heart of the city. This is what is called the uvas, the water tanks of the city. It was an interesting exercise. These public buildings, authorities started to look at different sites that were empty or available for creating squares and open spaces. So they realized that there were some black holes, black stains, and these were all water tanks. So they thought, okay, water tanks, these are an opportunity for all these neighborhoods where they have small spaces that can be reconverted or rechanged into public spaces. So this is a water tank that was retransferred or reconverted. It used to be UVA, which is like a little cultural center, with the purpose of providing the community with a cultural activities. So this is what we see from the other side of the mountains. You need to actually make room to create public spaces. We created parks, so parque that explores the wishes and the desires of the community. So we explore each square meter. We turn it into a park. We need to make use of that space, and that's why that acupuncture started to create each of these spaces. This is the Library of Santo Domingo, with this air cable that you can actually reach with, and you can create in a very densely populated area a new concept, a new idea for a conversation within the neighborhood. So this is a question that we always ask ourselves. Is it enough to create a green area with well-located trees and say, well, we are better human beings are happier human beings. Well, that's not enough. If with architecture we can actually design a building, that is part of the formula. Yes, the container is very important to rechange the meaning of the place, but it's empty of content. So how can we create content that would provide a new narration, a different narration, and create consensus around different kinds of practices within public spaces? So creating museums, and through the museum, we got to this conclusion where we are actually the creators of memorable experiences of education. And this means that we need to add different scenarios, provoking scenarios with contents, things that we have to say, together with an innovative mediation, a different kind of conversation that leads to that transformation. In a way that when we intervene this public space, will have to be the result of creating memorable experiences of education, of learning. So it's not just creating something nice, something pretty, but creating an experience of knowledge.
We defined this memorable learning experience as a process that takes place through impacting contents, inclusive conversations, and innovative formats that will stimulate people and individuals to transform their understanding of the world. If I apply this to museum design, I need to apply it also for the public space. We in museums work through our exhibits. Through our exhibits, we create situations that will allow the public to connect with content in a vivid, inclusive, participative manner. And the Interactive Science Museum is very good at it. In a way, science museums are always trying to connect people with content, with reality, with life in a different and novel manner. These are all different images of the museum. How do we get this out to the streets? How do we do to make it sure that this experience that takes place within the museum can go beyond the walls of the museum and we can create that common ground where everyone is engaged? So we need to go back to building public spaces. Once we have opened the place, once we have connected people and we have created the space, how do we make sure that experiences actually take place? In our case, when we did Explora, we had a purpose. We said we are going to create a new space in the city. It cannot be just a flat space where we will circulate. It needs to be a space that will speak of the spirit of the place. So we have a 2,000 square meter room full of physical phenomenon at a very nice urban scale where people can connect with this phenomenon in the open air. This is like a carousel because people can actually tour, and there are also some baskets, so they need to throw the balls into the baskets. But since this is going round, it can never be a straight line. It needs to be a curve. So there's a whole phenomenon that is in motion there. This whole park you see here that connects Carabobo and Cundinamarca is filled with experiments in scientific situations that are mediated by these facilitators, the one in the red shirts, that help people participate and become involved in those interactive processes. In a way, it is about creating devices, creating technology devices for learning, for communication in the public space in a way that we can encourage people to engage in conversation. Public space is not some bench that you need to sit in. It is also an excuse where people can become engaged and connected in a different manner. And there was a deliberate purpose on our part of building these 4 square boxes. We didn't want this museum to feel as a museum. We wanted this museum to feel like a park, somewhere you go and learn, and you go in and out, always in a participative manner and always interacting with every single device. This is virtually a forest, but these are all interactive devices, an Archimedes screw, a wave ladder where people can use this 10-meter high structure and play with the waves, and a series of different phenomena that are scattered in this park next to this pedestrian street and this highway, next to the botanic garden in this public space. Being able to create this territory where the idea is to provide continuous excuses for communications changes the attitude of people towards this environment and creates different dialogues that go beyond this idea of public space that is solely used to express discrepancy. There is a new form of communication that has to do with consensus and an invitation to dialogue, an invitation to be included in those interactive phenomena that are open to the public in this space. So it is a museum-like experience, but in the open air, where people can interact with every one of these phenomena. This is on the other side of the park. This is the planetarium. The planetarium and the park are divided just by one street. We have these acoustic shells where people can sit and have remote conversations, so university students can come here and interact in this space. A little bit more about the different interactive experiences that people get in the streets and the type of experiences they live when they come to the park. So it's a museum that is no longer within the museum. This is a sun clock, and this is different contents that go beyond building devices for interaction. This is the city planetarium. This is our planetarium. As you can see, there is a very large surface here. Why? Because this becomes a very large screen at night for conversation and for discussion. At the museum, the experience is not solely limited to what you are showing in the galleries. In addition to that, we create an active programming throughout the year that will allow people to appropriate that public space so that the content can go beyond the walls of the museum and create different situations with the country. And we call that taking the streets. How does the museum take the streets? So we have this large park, and at nights we organize concerts, shows, live performances, lectures in the open areas with national and foreign scientists that talk about different things. This took place just last week. We did an experiment. We said, well, we are the city planetarium. What if we talk to the Philharmonic Orchestra and we design a show to travel across the universe? Because in the planetarium, we have this whole software that allows us to visit every single planet, to travel to the moon. So what if we create some content that will narrate with images through music in the form of a live performance and always navigating through different content? So on this stage, and as I said, this was 10 days ago, there are approximately 6,500 people with the Philharmonic Orchestra, a very large screen with images of the universe, of the deep space, navigating with the public in a live performance. So every activity that is organized in this park go to disseminate science and knowledge. What is the outcome of that? Well, there's an audience that starts appropriating that space in permanent search of new conversations. They are now aware that there are new conversations going on there. Here's where they talk about these things. And since this is an inclusive, participative space, it is turning as some new center, some new core for inclusion in such a way that many couples, for instance, homosexual couples that have no other place where they can meet in the city, it became a very good meeting point for certain people that feel excluded, tacitly excluded from other places in the city. So explicitly, this is a place for inclusion and participation. And therefore, it immediately mobilizes all those demographics in the city that need these spaces. This is yet another example of that image. This is the Park of Wishes, Parque de los Deseos, that has this transformative power. And finally, How do we make sure that the museum creates a temporary space in other areas? Our country is highly rural, and municipalities and small cities of approximately 30,000 people, for instance, the case of Antioquia, which is the department where I live, it's very hard to bring everyone there, people that live 6 hours away from the museum. How do you get them to come to the museum? No. And the museum cannot be some far distant place where you can go only once a year and you probably never went there to connect with knowledge. So how do we make sure that the museum does not exist purely in the museum, but it exists everywhere? Our content needs to transcend our premises. So we have 4 different trucks that are itinerating, and they are trucks because there's no other way we can do it. We cannot have buses, we cannot have trailers, because there are certain areas in Antioquia where the roads are so rudimentary, and it's really necessary to get to very small municipalities to show this content and to create some small situation in the public space that has something to do with what we do at the museum. So these trucks travel along the roads of Antioquia and Colombia. We were in Peru last month, touring Peru in this itinerating journey, and we were trying to align the agenda of our park with the new exhibits so that there's always an itinerating expression for those visitors that cannot come to us, so we go to them. So we create a dialogue between all these regions and the Science Museum. Some of these activities take place in parallel in these itinerating exhibits and in the park, and there's this device that we can deploy in 1-2 days, and it attracts 15,000, 20,000 people. So if you are the one that is asking someone else to dance, if you are proposing this new dialogue in a city, you need to make sure that this dialogue transcends and that is maintained throughout time, and that you are applying every single resource that you have at the museum in order to foster that conversation. It's all interactive devices and phenomena that are built with very well designed but very basic devices that can go to every single territory and that can actually encourage these participative spaces in open places, as well as it happens within the Science Museum. These are mobile units that are activated throughout the territory and in different places, and that are capable of fostering this dialogue, mobilizing our academic agenda at the municipality. It's like a modern circus, a circus that comes to a city that can activate certain situations, that can mobilize everyone to become engaged in certain things that they are not normally exposed to in these communities. So this is the way we need to make things happen. And taking it to the next level, because then people always ask you, with an exhibit, how do you show that you can actually improve and contribute to education? Well, you cannot do it in a one-day session, but surely you can do it in longer processes. So taking it to the next level, when we're talking about the transformative power of the museum, is how do I use museum tools to do museum science, to design your interactive devices, to design your exhibits, and to design your interventions in the public space. How do all of these become tools that you can use with your visitors? How do you create situations with your visitors that will change their context, their territory, that will address their own problems? And there's a philosophy we've been working on, and that is that science, technology, research, project-based learning, they are all means to transform citizens' reality. A science museum is not necessarily the apology that science is perfect and that there's nothing better and let's worship science the way we worship a new faith. No, that's not our purpose. How do we make sure that tools that are used to build knowledge or science, or those tools that we use to create exhibits in a museum, those tools need to be those experiences that really matter in order to transform those communities. When you are doing a design project or when you're doing a research project, you need to have critical thinking, you need collaborative work, you need to co-create with others, you need to do prototyping, you need to design for visitors, for the target audience. So how do we make sure that this does not happen only with your team, but also with people, with territories, with communities? How do we get them to appropriate those tools, those processes, to transform their own realities and their own territories? And 2 weeks from now, we will be inaugurating our maker space. We call it the Exploratorium, which is a public experimentation space, the purpose of which is to give the communities what we're doing inside. We want our visitors to be the designers. We want our target audience to be the ones to propose strategies and experimentation tools in order to share knowledge, to experiment, to develop ideas and collaborative projects with the philosophy of learning by doing, because that's what we do at museums. We learn by doing. This Exploratorium is the reflection of what's going on in our territories today. How ITCs added to makers tools, those that do things, how do they become excellent opportunities to transform our territories? So coming back to the very beginning of my presentation, this is an image of Moravia 40 years ago. This is the peak of the landfill, and in the background we see the city. And this is what that landslide, this landfill looked like 30 years ago. This is at the heart of the city. Can you imagine all that garbage at the heart of the city? And it grew and grew. And we were saying that landfill was next to Explora Park. This is 2004, how that landfill had been populated. In 2011, we managed to relocate those communities. And this is going to be the last image I'm going to show you. The first project we had in Explora was to talk to the community, to collaborate with the community, to share knowledge with the community. And we discussed how those tools used at the museum had to transform our territory. So when we got there, before even the building was built, we launched a program, which is the one that we apply in our communities today, where we just tried to make friends with our neighbors. I mean, we weren't there to tell them astronomy is the best, robotics rule. That's not what we wanted. It was like asking them. We were there to listen. What are your interests? And when you listen, creative tools become transformative tools. So we set a process in motion that began with the mothers of the families that were living in that Moravia neighborhood. And it turned out that many of them were farmers. They had done some farming in the past. So we started having urban crops, and we started sharing knowledge. And that became sort of an excuse for all of those mothers to get together and to innovate. And when we started with these farmers groups, it became not only a line for social meeting, but for social transformation. 5 years after that, that group of mothers that were doing this became a society that ended up transforming that landfill. So this image is that same transformation, that same pile of garbage we saw is being managed by those mothers that manage that mountain as a public space where you can go, you can visit it. And these are all ornamental plants, orchids, flowers. And they set up a cooperative that has two purposes. One of them, they sell plants. That is what these mothers know nowadays. And second, they manage a public space in the city that used to be the place where they lived, and that now it's a center for production of flowers and all sorts of plants in the heart of the city. So I believe that this image incarnates an ideal. With our communities, we can create content that will transform public space as a different way of appropriating territory. So there's something that I think of every single day. We need to make sure that the public space is literally public. We want it to be democratic. Not only do we want to be able to demonstrate peacefully and democratically, we want to be allowed to transform the territory for our communities based on our interests, based on our motivations, based on our dreams. Because bottom line, this is where we live, and we want to feel a part of it. So I believe that the lesson we learned from this and this project I'm working for, that of course we have committed all sorts of sins in this project. Here we are in the house of God, so we probably can ask for forgiveness for our sins, but that is my message today. The takeaway message from this session would be content and conversations between the museum and the community can actually be the cornerstone for the transformation of the public space, the design of the public space, instead of having that relation of technocrats, of having this is the space you need, this is the space you require in order to have a better life, like they are some sort of strangers or like they are others. So this image shows that this is not necessarily so. If the institutions really learn to listen and create the possibilities for citizens to transform their territory, those transformations will effectively acquire a new significance in the form we inhabit the space. But in addition to that, we're going to know that it's literally public space created by the public themselves. Thank you very much.